one thing that I regret is that candidly, the hardest part was
Drew Schiller, thank you for joining me today. Excited to have a conversation with you.
yeah, likewise. Glad to be here.
Why don't you start by just backing us up to kind of how Validic came to be? What was the seed for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say, if I knew healthcare was this hard, I don't know that I would have gotten into it.
Okay,
But,
okay,
that being said, it's the fact that it's hard means there's a lot of opportunities, right? My co-founder and I, we both went to the University of Iowa. That's where we met, and we were best friends there. And we'd always talked about starting a company together. And he was getting out of graduate school. This was in the 2010 timeframe. He was getting out of graduate school. I was looking for something that I was running a software development and branding company at the time, and looking for something that scale outside of billable hours. So I was messing around with different online startup concepts, and as we were talking about what could be. Initially, the original concept was actually something he brought to me, which was that both of our families are from the Midwest. Both of them live in kind of rural areas, and both of our families, unfortunately, kind of have food deserts, even though they're in farmland country, and they were relatively unhealthy, right? Not necessarily our parents, but our more extended family. And that's always kind of bothered us and something we talked about. And so what we really wanted to do was look at, how can we use health incentives to help motivate healthy behavior change? And that idea actually came from, the a concept at the time. There was, you got to think 2010. The Biggest Loser was popular on television, right? There was a really popular app called Healthy Wage, is like kind of paying people to lose weight, and so that concept. And that was actually how we started. Initial idea was weight loss challenges, and originally
okay,
designed for health clubs and large self-insured employers.
okay.
And like we built the technology for them to kind of run these. And
So
the
it's
the
safe to say you've had a few pivots, in other
we
words.
we had some pivots. Yeah, the first pivot came when we were in a startup accelerator in 2012 called Tech Wildcatters down in Dallas. And what we were trying to do is we were, talking with um, folks in the corporate wellness space about our products and like how it could get big. And, everyone's kind of scratching their heads saying, I don't know, this is not a company, you know. Um, but the feedback we got was, look, in fact, I remember directly the head of HR benefits for Southwest Airlines at the time was telling us, she's like, look, you have one small program, but I have all these problems. Like I have baggage handlers that have musculoskeletal challenges, and they're smokers, and I have flight attendants who are in the air and have their own set of challenges, and pilots who are pretty sedentary, and I have front desk workers, I have office workers, like all of them have different health needs, and I need programming that can support all of them. And so we kind of took that feedback and we're scratching our heads, and we thought, how can we deliver all these programming options, when we're just two guys and an idea? And so
You were still just two people at this point.
just two people, yeah. And we thought, um we had kind of this epiphany moment. We thought, like, well, there's all these consumer health apps out there. Like there's Fitbits, there's Runkeeper, there's like, we're not going to build a better step tracker than a Fitbit, or a better running app than Runkeeper, a better nutrition app than MyFitnessPal. Why don't we just integrate with them? Like those can be our programming options. And then, we can use the incentives from the employers to help drive behavior change. And that was our first pivot. And the second pivot came about 9 months later, when we were taking an early version of that product out to market, which it was still just the two of us. And effectively, all we were able to do was get some very, very basic data integrations with these different apps and devices, because way harder than what we expected. And as we were out talking to folks in the market, um, what we heard pretty continually was, hey, look, you're going to be up against some stiff competition, well funded, companies like ShapeUp and Limeade, and, all the Virgin Pulse and all these companies that were already out there in the market. And they said, but nobody has the data that you guys have from all these consumer health apps and devices. That seems like a thing. What if you just license that data? So we heard that enough, and we started asking people like, well, what if we just provided the license to the data, and got some really strong feedback on that. And so in April of 2013, we kind of market tested the concept of Validic. It was we had immediate response. And then we fully like kind of launched publicly in July of 2013, and just had overwhelming demand. It was just incredible demand. And so just to kind of back up, what we launched with when we finally launched Validic was the concept of the kind of the category defining health IoT platform that brings in all of the consumer health data, right? So it brings in data from all the, at the time, Nike Fuel Band and Jawbone and like
Yeah.
even Fitbit. All these companies have either like, or all these products have either like gone out of existence or been acquired, right? So that was kind of,
But the integrator survives.
yeah, that's right. Well, that was kind of one of our value props. We said, look, why would you spend your time integrating on any one of these devices? Because you don't know who's going to like you shouldn't be in the business of picking the winners. You should be in the business of collecting the data from whatever consumers want to use. And Validic allows you to do that. You build to us once, you get everything in perpetuity. If a device, goes out of business, hey, we're the ones that did the work, not you, right? So
Right.
that was a value prop at the time that really resonated. And now, that value prop still continues to resonate. As we have the largest health IoT platform now. It's the most awarded. We capture data from over 650 disparate sources today, always adding more. Now it's not just cloud sources, it's Bluetooth, like in-home health devices, like FDA listed. And we're able to capture any data anywhere, that's kind of captured outside of the four walls of the hospital and people's daily lives. And as part of that, that value proposition of, hey, look, the world is going to continue to evolve, sensors continue to improve. We're now seeing the explosion of CGM, right? We're now seeing the explosion of more relevant data from things like Aura Ring and Whoop. And
Mhm.
like Validic is always on the forefront of what the data capture is, which devices are. When a manufacturer comes out with a new device, we integrate it, and our clients don't have to do anything, right? They just, as long as they're connected to our API, they get the data through their feed without having to lift a finger.
Was that always the vision, or is any of that sort of a happy accident in terms of things falling in place?
It was ever since we launched Validic to the market in April of 2013. That was the vision, but it was not intuitive to us. Like we got our butts kicked over and over again in customer discovery meetings until we finally kind of woke up to what people were really looking for. And
Well,
that was
walk me
hard. It
through
was
that.
hard to pivot to that.
Walk me through that. So, what were the kinds of things that you were presenting to the market that you were getting handed back to you?
Yeah. So after our what I think was a really cool um weight loss challenge product that actually it worked a little bit like a poker pool, where like people would like employees would buy in like $25 entry fee, and like $10 would pay for our product, and then $15 would fund a prize pool. And then we would pay out the prize pool based on kind of the weight loss, and like you pay out the number of places, and like the more people that joined, the more money there was to win, right? That was our first product, and like that was honestly dead on arrival, but it was a cool it was a cool
Okay.
concept. um but the thing that we were really proud of before we pivoted to what Validic is today was a really cool behavior change platform where we were working with social psychologists, and we were developing an upfront survey that would assess an individual's personality, health and fitness goals, and then look at their state of readiness for change, and start to decide like, hey, based on what this person needs to improve on in their health, and based on what they actually are willing to work on today, how can we actually match them with the right app or device? And then we were going to use programmatic motivational interviewing techniques, which back in 2012 was pretty groundbreaking.
Yeah.
And we were going to help to motivate. In fact, our company name at the time was called Motivation Science. We were going to use the science of the data to motivate people toward healthy behavior change. And so if somebody was ready to tackle smoking cessation, we would have them on a program there. If they were not ready for that yet, but they were open to moving more, we would start them with an app for that, right? So that was the initial, and we loved the concept,
Yeah.
and we just could never get over the hump to really make it an effective solution. Kind of with being two guys underfunded, no connections in the industry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is that partially, this is sort of a tangent, but is that partially just because of the baseline problem of behavior change, how difficult it is, even if you make the conversation intuitive, just how hard it is to get people to change their patterns?
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a big part of it. The other big part of it was honestly, it was at the time a bit too far of a stretch for most self-insured employers to buy into that concept. Like they were like, I'm just looking for something that's like kind of a fun challenge product. And like you
Yeah.
guys are like you guys are trying to like automate healthcare here. And like I get it. That's not I don't know if that's our thing to do. And so, it was I think just like there've been companies now that have popped up that are taking that concept and I'm just like, oh man, thank God. It's the plight of being an innovator, and especially in healthcare, is like getting the timing right on an idea,
Mm,
really hard,
yeah.
really hard.
Well, timing wise, people could look at you now and they could see you as really one of the big success stories in health tech. And people look at, 2025 version of Drew Schiller and they're like, he's got it. He's doing it. But I know it wasn't always that way. You said if you'd known how hard it was going to be, you might not have done it. So let's take us back. And tell us about some of the mistakes that you made or some of the things that you regret as you built the company, and maybe what you learned from those moments.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that I regret is that when we were first really scaling, um, and like post Series A, um, we were effectively lighting money on fire. I mean, we were spending an absurd amount of money on customer acquisition. We had no thought to how long a customer would stay, to how big the market was, to how much kind of run rate we'd have. We were just riding high and really really blowing through money. That all came to a head when two things happened in like the second half of 2015. So the first thing that happened was we had pretty much signed up most of the corporate well-being companies at that time as customers. And that was the first market that we entered. Was we like the companies we would have been competing against with that product I mentioned, we just sold the IoT platform to them because they all needed those data integrations. And the cool thing was that they would actually be in presentations with potential customers, and their potential customers would say, well, how many devices do you integrate with? And they'd be like, well, we're thinking about adding Fitbit. And they're like, well, we just talked to this other company and they integrate with like 80 things through some company called Validic. So then we get a phone call from that other company and be like, hey, we need you guys right now.
Yeah.
So, but so there was a bunch of demand in that market that we in some way helped generate, but we we kind of blew through it. Like it was a
Mm,
limited number of customers that we could sell to. So that was the first thing that happened. The second thing that happened was there were no new entrants for a while because in 2015 that was the first minor down cycle of funding in digital health.
mhm,
And so when there weren't new companies getting funded, there were no new contracts coming to us. And so what that kind of meant was we were continuing to spend at those elevated levels on customer acquisition, but then we weren't getting the sales. So by like mid 2016, we had less than 12 months cash in the bank. We were burning, well over $500,000 a month. Like, I mean, we were just tearing through, and we had raised Series B just the year before, and we were just blowing through the money. And so we had to kind of pull the emergency brake and say, whoa, 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 like I see the writing on the wall here. Like we need to actually run a sustainable business, and
mm,
that like while I say it was a mistake, and it was, that lesson has really stuck with us. I mean, we have survived to this point now. I mean, we're now 10 years out from that, where we've survived because of that experience of saying, hey, look, like we need to be able to use cash efficiently. We need to be smart with customer acquisition costs. We need to really be thoughtful about how we approach the market. And we are the company in our space that has survived, this sort of life cycle of digital health. I mean, we've been on the market selling our product for over 12 years now. Like
Wow,
that's a
wow.
long time.
What was the hardest, part of that transition? You said pulling back the reins. It probably meant letting some people go?
Yeah. Yeah, it did. Candidly, the hardest part was that we did have to let some people go, not that many, but some. But the hardest part was we actually had even more people leave because it was like, oh, this is not, the fun, free flowing, high flying company that I joined. Like they're trying to be smart with their money now. Like they're not paying us crazy bonuses and all that kind of like we had bonus structures that just made absolutely no fiscal sense. And so we put an end to that and people were like, well, that's not what I signed up for. And so
Really?
and I think we saw a lot of that in, the 2021, 2022 timeframe as well, when companies all of a sudden had to the funding wasn't there and everyone was like, whoa, 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 we need to pull way back on how we compensate employees. And everyone was like, that's not going to work for us. So that was the hardest thing. We had a real culture shift. I mean, we had to change over the entire management team. We had to change how we conduct ourselves internally. We had to really put up just a sharp focus on culture because it was not great. It was not great at the time. There's a saying that like sales cures all or whatever from a culture perspective, and like I would say sales masks it.
Mm, yeah,
Like
yeah,
there was always kind of a culture problem at the time.
yeah. What are
But
some of the things you did to fix that? I've seen, LinkedIn posts from you about how much you prioritize that now. Did you read books? Did you bring in mentors or consultants? What did you do?
yeah, so a few things. One is I brought in uh leadership in our company that are very, very um uh emotionally savvy, like emotionally intelligent, as it comes to employee management. And one of the first hires we made was actually toward the end of 2015. Was our now VP of People and Places, and she really helped put in place some rigorous structure, whereas we was really pretty loosey goosey on the human resources side before that, from just from a benefits and capabilities perspective. But I'd say probably the best hire we made for that in this regard was Brian Carter, who's now my COO, and Brian is very empathetic. He's a great leader, and he really helped to bring the voice of the everyday person up in every conversation, right? And it's hard as a founder sometimes to think about what is it like to be an employee at my company because we have a different seat, right? Like
Yeah.
we have a different seat at the table, and it's hard. It's impossible not to. And so, Brian is always very good about raising up, like, hey, have you thought about what this might actually feel like, right? And I'm like, that's a really interesting way to look at it, right? Like I hadn't thought about that. And the other thing that I'll say is that we did remarkably well, and this is just something that really this was team sourced. I'll give Brian credit, but I know there's more people than that. But in 2018, we gave control of our company values over to our team, and I say control. I use that word lightly, but what I mean by that is like before that, we had always had our company values were something that like myself and my co-founder had defined. Like this
Yes.
is who we're going.
Went on a vision quest, wrote it down, then shared it with everybody
Yeah,
on
right, exactly.
tablets.
Here are the tablets from on high. This is our culture, right? And I remember we had a company kickoff at the beginning of 2018, and we decided like, hey, so as a company, like you team members are going to all help decide what is our actual company culture, like what are our values as a team. and we workshopped it together. We had kind of small groups. We came up with different concepts. All of those concepts were, we formed a volunteer culture committee that I was not on. And they came up with what are the Validic culture, what are the actual values and what do they mean, right? And it ended up being something that's way better than I could ever come up with on my own, and something that's still to this day that we live by. And that, like, those values have survived, and been something that the team has kept alive now for 6 or 8 years, I guess, right? It's pretty amazing. And even when COVID hit, we were fully on site. Everybody went to the office in Durham. COVID hit. We have now never for a single day gone back in the office since like the first week of March of 20.
And you have how many employees?
We have about 75 employees. Yeah. And we never, like, so we went fully on site to fully virtual, have never been back in the office. And the culture has, if anything, it has improved. It's gotten better. The team has a ton of autonomy. Like, they have a lot of responsibility. Like, every single one of us have a lot of responsibility to maintaining that culture, and we hold each other accountable to it. It's really incredible.
Yeah. Let's shift gears, kind of move to the present and talk about just the current status and even the zeitgeist around remote patient monitoring, how the messages that you're hearing from the current administration and HHS are going to impact the kind of work that you're doing and kind of how you see the next year playing out.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually just at a meeting with HHS this week, with the Consumer Technology Association, and I'm on the health division board there. And as the Consumer Technology Association, we were speaking with HHS saying, "Hey, we understand that wearable devices is really important to Secretary Kennedy and this administration." They said, "We want to get all Americans on wearable devices in the next 4 years," which is a very ambitious goal. And I think actually not well understood, even by myself at the time. And I'd love to talk a little bit about that. And then the other thing we said is also, in order for the data to be usable, AI is really important here. And so, the Consumer Technology Association, I think, can uniquely represent both of those lenses, being that they represent the largest tech companies and health tech companies in the country. And so, as part of that meeting with HHS, the thing that really resonated with me personally, that was honestly a bit of a surprise, if I'm just to be direct, was that you know they said, "Look, healthcare in America right now is increasing at double the rate of our GDP, and if it continues going that way, we will run out of money, right? Like, we can't, that's just an unsustainable curve, right? You can't we have to change that. And we are sicker in America today than we ever have been as a country, right? We use more healthcare per capita um than any other Western country. And we kind of have a choice. Like, in 20 years from now, do we want to be have continued on this path, in which case we'll be in a really awful predicament? Or do we want to try to get some proactive uh, uh, health interventions in place today that will actually keep people healthier and hopefully prevent them from being as sick later in their life? And that's something that we've been working toward since we launched Validic 12 years ago. It's like, it's all about how can we help people be more proactive in their health? How do we help healthcare deliver better, more proactive care? How do we get the data in the hands of clinicians? How do we help patients be more self-effective in managing their own conditions? Like, so I was surprised at how well that message was resonating with me personally.
One
And
one one quick
yeah,
note, did you feel like, maybe just to push back on that slightly, that it went beyond agreement on the problem? I feel like there's a lot of talk about healthcare is broken, and we can all stand around and say healthcare is broken, give lots of, reasons. Um, Tell me how it moved sort of to more of a proactive place.
yeah, absolutely. So this is where I will just say, I don't think that all of the answers to that are known, and I think that's one of the
That's
challenges,
fair.
right?
That's fair.
But I think that's why I was excited to be with the Consumer Technology Association in that meeting, because around that table are the companies that can make that difference, right? Around that table, in addition to Validic, which is getting all the wearable data into the EHR workflow to empower clinicians to deliver the care, there was, Dexcom and Abbott from a CGM perspective. There was Google and Samsung from a wearable, consumer tech perspective. There were companies there were EHR vendors there. There were companies that help with employee benefits. I mean, it was the
Okay.
consumer technology ecosystem, and we are the ones who were really coming up with, these are the ways that we can help, right? And here's some policy adjustments that you could make that could help us more. But understanding that, like, ultimately, we're the ones that are going to be able to help deliver on the promise of what digital health can be by helping people live, healthier lives, hopefully use less of the healthcare system, hopefully use the data to better understand their health, and ultimately, develop fewer chronic conditions.
Were there any key regulatory changes that were recommended that you think could actually make their way through in the near future?
Um, The short answer is probably in that meeting there was a lot of discussion. I can't say specifically everything that was discussed, but what I will say is that um, there was a lot of talk around data ownership, specifically that patients own their data. And the administration would like to put that to bed. Like, there's a big, it's one of those things that, like, do patients own their data? Everyone, like, feels like they should, but then from a state law perspective, they don't really, and it's a big problem. And then, companies use, like, EHR companies and others use HIPAA as, like, kind of a bit of a barrier to actually being portable, which is, like, that's what the P and that's what the second P in HIPAA stands for, is portability, right? Um, and so all that, or I guess the only P in HIPAA, right? But anyway, so that's a big one, is I think that how can we put the data in the hands of patients more? And I think that will ultimately help them as consumers and help them get the data where they would like it to go. That was a big policy thing that was discussed. There were some more wonky things around, like, Tefka and stuff like that. And then I think there was a lot of discussion more broadly around, what is it that AI can specifically do to help with patient care, given that we have fewer clinicians and relative to the number of patients that we need, right? The ratio is only going to get worse. And that was one thing that was brought up by HHS was, how do we handle the staffing crisis? How do we either train more skilled workers, and also how do we leverage more data and AI to actually help to alleviate some of the burden? And I'll just be honest, these are thorny questions. There were no, like, pound the table answers here. Like, just to be clear, and I don't fault the administration. Like, this is something every administration has dealt with. Um,
In your position, it's a shifting slightly, but in your position, how do you assess use cases and opportunities in AI? Name the use case, and you've got 10 new platforms, 10 new opportunities every day, it seems, that are bubbling up. There's, like, it seems to me like there's a dual problem. There's just implementation of basic, this is the tool, how do I use it in my work? And then there's this idea of evolving constantly. Okay, there's a better one a month from now. What do I do about that general trajectory? So how do you think about that from the seat that you're in?
yeah, it's a real challenge. So I'll answer that in two ways. So one is, so for us at Validic, how we evaluate that is that we try to look at using AI solutions that are more platform based, that we see will continue to evolve with the direction that we're going, right? Because to try to avoid the situation of, like, to your point, every month there's something new that comes out, right? And so where we try to be really thoughtful. It's hard. We try to be really thoughtful at that. I will also say we have sign contracts with, AI vendors for certain things, and it just didn't work out. Like, it wasn't that the product didn't work, it didn't work out the way we had needed it to, the way we thought it might. And so we had to, end the contract. And like, that's disappointing, but I think that's also innovation. Like, who's gonna bat 1,000 at when they're implementing new technologies, right? So I think that's one thing. The second thing we've been
Some
doing.
trial and error is involved.
Oh, trial and error is absolutely involved. Absolutely. It can't not be, right? Which is one of the challenges in healthcare, right? But the other thing that we've been doing, and I think this is maybe something more as a good starting point for healthcare organizations, is that we've also started to adopt AI that is implemented by current vendors. So, for example, what I mean by that is, we use Atlassian Confluence as a internal wiki for a lot of our internal products, and for our internal sort of documentation. And we added the AI on that, which does really, really neat things. Like, it allows you to query your own documentation, right? And like, ask questions of your own documentation and kind of get answers on that. It also will highlight acronyms, and use, like, when you click on that, it uses your own documentation to define that acronym. So if you have internal acronyms that are used, it's like, what does this mean to us? Right? Not
Yeah.
just like, what does this mean to the world? Because it might mean something different, but it's actually, what does this mean to us? And so really creative, like, minor, small, useful things that are big productivity boosters, like that. And so we've actually taken that approach to how we implement AI for our clients, is that we have a product called Validic Sparks. And one of the first use cases of this is to summarize RPM data in the EHR clinical workflow for the clinicians,
Huh.
so that it just kind of takes the cognitive burden off. So rather than, like, go to the patient chart and look at all of the remote data and graphs and kind of try to be like, okay, so what's been happening here? It instead, rather than, it answers the question of like, here's what's happened over the last 6 weeks. Here's how adherent the patient's been to in the program. Here's any clinical escalations you should know about, really quickly, right? And then if you want to know more, you can always look at all the data. And then it also will draft a clinical progress note. So you can be like, okay, so based on all the data and how the patient's been progressing in the program, here's the clinical progress note. And now I can add to that. And here's what I told the patient. Click save, done. Right. So that kind of thing, I think, is where you can find some easy, quick wins. As long as you're, for any vendor you're already currently partnered with, I think that's like a really good first step.
Well, I want to close with on a more personal note. You've been at this 15 years, right? You said 2010. Not that you'd never see it on your face.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't worry.
I, d-
Uh,
I didn't used to have this much gray. Yeah.
um, but I know you had some rough patches early on. If you go back and look at that, talk to that 2010 Drew Schiller, what are a couple pieces of advice that you would have given to him?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is that this is a marathon, not a sprint. And, early on in our company's history, I treated it very much like a sprint. And you kind of, in some ways, you have to. When you start a company and it's just you, or just you and a co-founder, like, you're doing everything, right? You're chief cook and bottle washer, so to speak, right? You have to literally do everything. But the challenge is that it's also really easy to burn out, and it's also really easy to burn out your friends and family. Like, I had a specific instance where um, in 20 between 2013, when we launched the market, and then 2014 when we raised Series A, my wife had our first kid. And so the timeline was pretty wild. It was like, she got pregnant in around May of 2013. Like a month and a half later, got a seed round led by Mark Cuban. Like, we started hiring our first people. We started going to our first conferences. I was on 24/7. Like, sales were taking off. We were hiring people like crazy. Fast forward to February of 2014, when my first son was born. We had our full executive team starting the week later, and I had promised my wife I was going to take 2 weeks off of work. I didn't. And, that continued. We raised Series B. I was now on stage everywhere. I was traveling internationally. I was like, we were everywhere. And that was great in some ways for the company. but it's awful for my business. Or sorry, it's awful for my personal life, I should say. And I actually had an experience in March of 2015. It was the month after my son had turned 1, and I was at this. It was a CEO boot camp called Reboot. And while I was there, I realized how important my family was to me, and I also realized, oh, like I haven't really been there. And I remember I called my wife from this boot camp, and I said, hey, I want to apologize. Like I don't think I've really been very present with you for a while. And she's like, are you serious? I said, yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I'm really serious. She's like, man, I checked out back in December. I
Mm,
was like, "What?"
mm,
She's like, "Yeah, like I just kind of figured I'm on my own raising this kid, like Drew's gonna do his own thing." And
mm.
like she's like, "I didn't know what that was gonna mean for anything, but like I kind of stopped trying." And I hadn't even noticed. I
Wow.
literally had not even noticed. And so we had a really long conversation. And I remember I was having a conversation with one of the coaches there later that day at lunch, and I was like, I think I just saved my marriage. And I didn't even know it was in trouble.
Mm.
And, that led to a lot of, a lot of really good discussions with my wife over the next, weeks and months, and a reorientation of just how I approach business and life. And I'm really thankful for that experience. I definitely would have not been married today to my wife, and had another kid with her
Yeah.
if that had not happened. And, I'm
Did you
definitely,
feel
yeah.
did you feel like you had to readjust your ambition, or did those things kind of fall in line with a new prioritization?
Yeah, I definitely did not have to adjust my ambition. I had to I what I had to adjust was my comfort and relationship with anxiety, right? Like so the I am always somebody who's going to shoot high and run hard and go far. You can get a lot done and also make time for others if you allow yourself to do it. If you allow yourself to set things aside, and I think that you'll see that with a lot of highly productive people. They can do a lot in a limited period of time and then also kind of turn that off and focus on others. And like it is so hard to do. It is a muscle you have to work. But like at some point in time, like nobody is like good for 100 hours a week. Like you're not like it's just impossible. You cannot put that much good focus on something for that. And so what I try to do is be highly hyper productive for the periods of time that I am working, and then highly focused on, family and my relationships when I'm not.
Well, we can have a whole separate call, Drew, on how you do that and how you stay hyper productive with your team, but we'll leave it there. Appreciate all the work that you're doing with CES and CTA. I mean, advocating for these regulatory shifts and really being a voice there in Washington. So appreciate that. And we're going to be watching to see where this Sparks program goes. This is relatively new, right?
Yep, that's right.
So congrats on that launch, and we'll be watching it. But thanks for taking time with me today.
And thanks, Logan.
All right. Take care. Be well.